Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, as we are now working through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to the section called Children of Adam, and we're working with the poem I Sing the Body Electric. This is section number 2. Now, my assumption is that you've been with us at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist. And I hope that you've been with us from the very beginning with inscriptions all the way up through I Sing the Body Electric section number 1. Certainly I hope that you have been able to watch our introductory set of comments for I Sing the Body Electric. Now, as we have been messing around with these lines from Children of Adam, we have reminded ourselves to come back to passage 27 of Song of Myself. I merely stir, press, feel with my fingers, and am happy. To touch my person to someone else's is about as much as I can stand. However, I want you to keep in mind, and you can already write this down at 3A, I want you to keep in mind the work that we've already done with Song of Myself, passage 33. Do you remember that incredible cataloging passage? We're going to see something very similar here in passage number 2. Now, one of the reasons why some people don't like I Sing the Body Electric is they feel like it's too repetitive, because you're going to begin to see things and hear things that you've definitely seen and heard before in other parts of Leaves of Grass. And I'll see that is true. That is true. But I'm going to argue that every time Whitman does this, he's trying to make the point of how he is the poet of everyone. Okay, and so we are going to get to some of these images of individuals and little snapshots of people that will look very much like the work starting from Pominock and the listing and cataloging that we saw there. Obviously, as well, the listing and cataloging that we saw in so much of Song of Myself. Now, because this is a longer poem, instead of my reading it in its entirety, we'll just go ahead and work through sections of it and make some observations. By the way, there are 2 moments in this poem when we're going to have some missing lines from the original 55 version that I'll share with you, just because I told you that we would be comparing the 55 edition with the later 67 edition. He begins, "The love of the body of man or woman balks account. The body itself balks account. That of the male is perfect, and that of the female is perfect." Now, first of all, in 55, he didn't write the love of the body, he wrote the expression of the body, which is fascinating that he would play it that way, but now it's the love of the body of man and woman. And then this word balks account. Now, I like this word balks because it plays around with what we've seen many times before, this translinguistic idea. There are things that I cannot explain, is his point. And the love of the body of a man or of a woman goes beyond anything that I can explain, he says. The body itself balks account. He was, of course, familiar with the biblical passage, "I'm fearfully and wonderfully made," the Psalm passage. And, of course, here we're going to celebrate the human body. We're doing that all the way through, obviously, I Sing the Body Electric. Notice the last line, "That of the male is perfect, and that of the female is perfect." It's interesting the way Whitman uses the word perfect. Go back and look at passage 1 of Song of Myself. You remember what he said about being in perfect health I began and all of that? Then we have a line that's been added that wasn't in the original 55 edition, "The expression of the face balks account." Now, this idea of the face is fascinating. Go back to passage 48 of Song of Myself. "Why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God in each hour of the 24, in the face of men and women, in my own face in the glass." Whitman was very much about the face, and he loved the idea that the face can represent so much. And so he'll begin to talk about the face and the expression, and then, of course, the rest of the body. And then he'll come to this word expression here in this line, that was obviously the first line of the 55 edition of this part of the poem. But the expression of a well-made man appears not only in his face, it's in his limbs and joints. Also, it's curiously in the joints of his hips and wrists. By the way, the word curiously is always a word. Anytime it's used in Leaves of Grass, he says it often. I wonder, I'm blown away by this curiously. And then notice it's the hips. I told you, all the way through Leaves of Grass, there will be references to hips and the wrists. It will be the joints that he's focusing on. He has an eye. It's in his walk. the carriage of his neck, the flex of his waist and knees. Dress does not hide him. The strong, sweet quality he has strikes through the cotton and broadcloth. In original 55, it was not broadcloth, but flannel. To see him pass conveys as much as the best poem, perhaps more. You'll linger to see his back, and the back of his neck, and shoulder side. Now put it in your notes. Whitman was a great watcher of people. We know that he hung out in places where there would be lots of people. Why? Because he wanted to look at them. But he didn't just look at them. I mean, it's obvious here. He studied them in the same way that an artist might take down sketches of people. Yes? Notice all the different ways that he's focusing specifically on different elements. Notice he talks about the flex of his waist, the knees. And then he says it. Doesn't matter what clothes he has on. You can't, in other words, he wants to see beneath the clothing, right? We'll get to to nakedness here in a bit. He says, to see him pass conveys as much as the best poem, perhaps more. Two observations. How many times in Leaves of Grass already have we heard a sentiment like this? I'm not going to give it to you. You go back and start finding them. That is to say, the best poems are the act poems, as he will have said it earlier in this set of lines, right? That idea of there's poems that are in action that are even more profound than anything written. I love the word perhaps, right? We've heard this use of this word as well. Perhaps more. You linger. Earlier it was loiter or loaf. Now it's linger. To see his back, the back of his neck and shoulder side. In other words, to try to study a man or a physical body from all perspectives, right? And then he continues. The sprawl and fullness of babes. Now, of course, Children of Adam is the title of this section, right? Notice how Whitman loves to speak of children, of babes, the bosoms and heads of women. So now we're going to begin to talk about women. The folds of their dress, their style as we pass in the street, the contour of their shape downwards. In other words, he wants us to know, I've studied women as much as I've studied men, and I'm equally impressed by their physical bodies as well. And then, taking us back to Song of Myself, passage 11, of course, and the 28 young men who were swimming. The swimmer naked. Now remember, swimming, after especially our study of passage 46, 47, swimming is an important metaphor, right? So we'll come back to it. The swimmer naked in the swimming bath. By the way, the word bath here just means like swimming out in a pool or a pond. Seen as he swims through the transparent green shine. By the way, in the 55 edition, it was the salt transparent green shine. Or lies with his face up and rolls silently to and fro in the heave of the water. In other words, somebody is out there floating in a pond, swimming, and it might even have been him as well, right? And then he gives a line in the 55 edition that is in fact not in the final edition. I'm going to leave to you why he keeps this one out. Framers, bare-armed, framing a house, hoisting the beams in their places, or using the mallet and mortising chisel. Now, of course, Whitman, as we said, grew up around builders. His father was a carpenter. He himself was a carpenter. Why he would edit this line out, who knows? But now we'll continue. The bending forward and backward of rowers and rowboats, the horseman and his saddle. So notice, we're just giving a litany of all of the different ways that he has seen the human body, right? Girls, mothers, housekeepers, in all their performances is the way he edited this. In 55, it was exquisite offices. It's an interesting word, though, performances. The group of laborers. Now notice, see, we moved from masculine to feminine, back to masculine. The group of laborers. This will remind us of I Hear America Singing. Seated at noontime with their open dinner kettles and their wives waiting. It's an interesting juxtaposition. In other words, the men are out working while the wives are back home waiting for their husbands to return. Whitman has clearly seen all these different images of a bunch of men who are working, taking their break, and eating their lunch together, right? The female, now we're back to female. Notice, so we're moving back and forth from masculine to feminine. The female, soothing a child, we're back to children and babes. The farmer's daughter in the garden or cow yard. And then we have another missing line that is not included in the final version. Again, I'll leave it to you why he would cut this one out. The woodman, rapidly swinging his axe in the woods. So why he decided to edit that one out, I'll leave to you. And then he comes back. The young fellow hoeing corn, the sleigh driver driving his 6 horses through the crowd. By the way, in the 55 version, it wasn't driving, it was guiding, and he changed it to driving. The wrestle of wrestlers. Now, if you'll remember from starting from Paumanok passage 15, that he played around with this idea of wrestling. I'll just take you back there for just a moment to give you one example of how we could play this game in passage 15. Do you remember this? He talks about himself, I, bearded, sunburnt, gray-necked, forbidding, I have arrived to be wrestled with as I pass for the solid prize of the universe. For such I afford whoever can persevere to win them. And of course, when we start thinking about wrestling from the biblical perspective, we've got Jacob and the angel of Genesis 32, 22 to 32, and Hosea chapter 12, 3 through 5. We mentioned all of that when we were starting from Paumanok 15. I'll let you go back and study that one again. Wrestling, for Whitman, is a great word picture. Why? Well, listen to how he describes it. The wrestle of wrestlers, 2 apprentice boys, quite grown, lusty. And I hear America singing it was robust. Go back and look at it. Here it's lusty. Good-natured, native-born, out on the vacant lot at sundown after work. The coats and caps thrown down. The embrace of love and resistance. So notice, we've got 2 guys who are wrestling, but he's going to see this as an example of love. Love and resistance. The upper hold and under hold. And for those of us who love wrestling, of course, we're going to enjoy the fact that, yay, wrestling gets into Leaves of Grass. And then, sounding very much like Milton and his fascination with hair. Here we are again. The hair rumpled over and blinding the eyes. It tells you that this is an image that he actually saw, right? He saw this. He saw a couple of kids out wrestling in a vacant lot, you know, that kind of thing. And then he shifts from the young men now to firemen, reminding us in Song of Myself, passage 33 of the mashed firemen. Remember that scene. The march of firemen in their costumes. The play of masculine muscle through clean-setting trousers and waist straps. And again, this play, the word play is a useful word for us, right? The slow return from the fire. The pause when the bell strikes suddenly again, and the listening on the alert. That is to say, notice firemen go off to fight, and then they come back, and then almost immediately the alert bell is rung again, and now they have to go back. Whitman had a great appreciation for the work of first responders, like, of course, the firemen. And then to finish the natural, he comes back to the word perfect one more time. Perfect, varied attitude, sounding like I Hear America singing. The bent head. This will take us back to Song of Myself, passage 5. The curved neck. Notice the word curved is elided, right? With that instead of ed, it's the apostrophe. And the counting. If you'll think about it, counting is going to be the last word of this section too. Counting is what Whitman's doing in these catalogings. In other words, he's paying attention to all these different things. Such like all these things he's just listed, I love. Notice the dash to remind us of Emily Dickinson. I loosen myself. Now that's an interesting phrase, loosen, as in what? To pay attention, to become relaxed, pass freely. In other words, I'm looking at everything. And at the mother's breast with the little child, we've heard this before in Leaves of Grass, swim with the swimmers, wrestle with the wrestlers, march in line with the firemen, and pause, listen, count. Notice his trinities, as we've said many times before when we were working with other poems. Learning, I believe, very much from St. Augustine. He loves his trinities. Notice he says, this is what I'm all about. I'm going to pause. I'm going to listen. He's got to be a great listener, right, to be a great poet. And I'm going to count. In other words, I'm going to catalog. I'm going to take photographs with words. That is to say, I'm going to show, not just tell. He'll move, by the way, just to set you up for passage 3 that's coming, he'll move from the general to the specific. And he will move in passage 3 to a very specific common farmer that he will reference. Let's finish quickly at 2a. Well, life is a wonderful catalog. At 2b, note the missing lines and try and answer the question why, as well as the key metaphor of swimming that we keep coming back to. Swimming is learning, swimming is struggling, wrestling is the same way. At 3a, the catalog section of Leaves of Grass comes to mind, as I said, from Song of Myself, passage 33 especially. And finally, at 3b, if you can own this passage, I would ask it this way. Who are the people in your life that you've enjoyed watching? And how you've watched them from multiple perspectives. And then finally this one, and reading a passage like this, I love to challenge students to think in these terms. When was the last time you really studied the people who you spend the most time with? Your friends, your parents. Tonight, just watch someone in your house and study them closely from all perspectives. And then I challenge you to sit down and try and write about it and see how you can build off of what Whitman's doing. Now in part 3, we're going to go from the general to a very specific individual that he will celebrate. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you.